We're calling this weekly program Nature Calls because it's our attempt to get you out of the house virtually and into our conservation work around the state. The program is approximately 15 minutes long with another 15 minutes for questions and answers. We feature a new conservation program every week on Thursdays at 3 p.m. And we're scheduled up until July and maybe beyond that, depending on how things go. I'm very pleased to introduce a man that most of you already know very well, and that's Steve Northcutt, our Director of Conservation. And he is going to, as he just said, tell us about the establishment of the Cahaba River National Wildlife Refuge and talk about the Red Hills work that he has dedicated his life to, basically. So Steve, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Jeff. I'm going to share my screen on this presentation. Can everybody see that?
Not yet. There it is.
Okay. So thank you so much. Yes, I am the Director of Protection. So I do land acquisition and conservation easements. And I started January of 2001. And I do want to give a bit of a shout out to several people that were before me that worked on the Cahaba. And because they had to do so much of the government relations, the refuge was started as a legislative authorization. And so I'll have to say, you know, Chris Oberholster, Wendy Allen, they started in 1997 or 8 and worked Congress. Representative Spencer Backus, without a doubt, needs a complete shout out, because without Spencer Backus working with, at the time, Senator Jeff Sessions and Senator Shelby, we never would have gotten the establishment of that refuge. So I've got one slide that I'm going to be very brief on. If you look at protected lands in the Southeast, Alabama is way behind others. In fact, this is an old chart. Alabama now has surpassed 5%, just barely over 5% of lands that are protected, whereas Florida is off the chart. They're over 30% of protected land. So, you know, we have a long way to go to continue to do land protection. So the first part of this is directed towards the Cahaba River National Wildlife Refuge and its biodiversity. Everybody probably knows about the Cahaba lily or the Shoals lily. It's really not found in that many places. It's found a few places in the Southeast, South Carolina, but really on the Little Cahaba and the main stem of the Cahaba, that's one of those kind of rare plants that people, especially people that live in the area, they have a lily festival every May. They really are proud that they've got that unique plant. And there's other plants I'll talk about later in the program when I speak just a few minutes about the Bibb County Glades, which is a nature preserve the Nature Conservancy owns and manages. Keith Tassin asked me to talk about what we do with state and federal partners. And that's considered a co-op. And that means we cooperate with a state or federal partner to protect land together. Now, again, I mentioned that this refuge was legislatively authorized, and I'll show you a picture of the refuge itself. Now, you see the river running through the green blotch, the green shaded area of the map. That is actually the what is owned by the federal government. All of those properties were acquired by the Nature Conservancy. I think it was 6 different landowners. In fact, that was my first project when I was hired in 2001, is to buy each part, negotiate the sale with each land owner, buy the property, and then sell it to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So we had to get the board to approve our loan to borrow the money from the LPF, the Land Protection Fund that the Nature Conservancy has. And then we had to find Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is LWCF funding for the feds to buy it from us. So a lot of effort, years of effort went into the Cahaba. And, you know, again, I mentioned the Cahaba lily is a unique plant that grows in the shoals, in the water. But there's also, I mean, there's 131 species of freshwater fish in the Cahaba River. I mean, for each mile, you know, it's a fairly short river, but there's more species per mile in the Cahaba than any other river in North America. There's almost 43 species of mussels, some fish and mussels found nowhere else on Earth. It's a really unique biodiversity in the river, but the upland habitat, the area around the refuge, it's a lot of that is longleaf pine habitat. Much of it has been altered. It was owned by timber companies, and they planted loblolly pine. So, you know, part of the refuge, we have helped cut the loblolly timber and plant longleaf pine. And a lot of it has had prescribed fire. Without Keith Tassin and our whole stewardship staff, we would have never seen much fire on the refuge. They've led the effort to bring in partners and burn hundreds of acres, if not thousands of acres of the refuge. So the area you see there represents about 3,600 acres of property that we bought and transferred. And then if you're able to see the yellow and black larger outline, those are properties that can be acquired by the refuge. They're considered the acquisition boundaries. And then I'm going to talk about a project we're working on right now. And I'm going to make sure Jim Wadsworth doesn't mind me bragging on him for a minute. But I've zoomed in, and so the area in red is 1,180, 1,160. We've got 2 or 3 different numbers. These are GIS numbers, but well over 1,100 acres of property that Jim bought on using his own money, basically doing what the Nature Conservancy does. He's co-oping this, and that property is eligible to be purchased through a recreational access appropriation that Mitch worked very hard on with Senator Shelby's staff. So that property is eligible to be included in the refuge. And right now we are doing title work on that, and we are doing the appraisal. Hopefully any day now we'll have that going. And I would just love to see that included in the refuge by the end of this calendar year. So that's exciting. That's what we're working on now. Next slide shows some of the other areas in the Cahaba River watershed that we've worked on. You see the refuge. It's in the kind of greenish outline. I will mention that the Cahaba River Wildlife Management Area that you see, that big block of kind of pink land, that is only under a lease. Forever Wild leased that property for 94 years. And the timber company that now owns that could actually they could sell that property and cancel that hunting or recreational access lease and pay back the state. So that is not permanently protected. But what is interesting is the green block, the Cahaba River Shelby County Park. We worked with Shelby County going back years ago to acquire about 450 acres that was owned by U.S. Steel. And then we got Shelby County to work with us so that Forever Wild could add additional acres. So that Shelby County Park is now at almost 1,600 acres with a lot of river frontage and great recreational access. The county built a nice little entry area with bathrooms and access. And I haven't been out to do the hiking trails because I've had knee surgery this last year, but I can't wait to get out there and see that. So our efforts there are, you know, help other people to buy land on the property in the watershed, then for us to acquire property with the federal partner, and then of course the Bibb County Glades, the 1,600 acres down there at the bottom, that is a nature preserve that we bought with our own money and grant funds, and that we manage as a nature preserve. And you know, one of the things that's unique about the Glades is the plant community. A lot of these rare plants, they're only known to occur. In fact, some are, you know, new to science. They're unique because they grow in these glade. A glade is a community, is an area where you would normally see a forest, but it's an open area, usually with shallow soils and rock outcrops. So this area has a dolomite limestone that has unique mineral characteristics, and so you've got the Cahaba lilies in the water, which are rare, and you got all these other terrestrial plant communities that are rare. So that's kind of half of my presentation on the Cahaba, but I'm just really excited that we've been able to work there over the years and had so much partnership. And at the end of this, we'll talk about anybody that has questions, I'll talk about that. I'm going to shift over to the land acquisitions and efforts that we've done in Monroe County. That's a couple of pictures of the Red Hill Salamander. Red Hill Salamander was actually only discovered in 1960. A biologist looking for snails in the area found this weird looking salamander and took it back to a research lab. And after doing genetic testing and looking at it from 1960 to 1976, in 1976, U.S. Fish and Wildlife determined that that was a unique species and designated it as a threatened species. And that's a very high conservation value of concern. And so what happened from 1976 when this was done is U.S. Fish and Wildlife put in a series of what they call HCPs, and that is a habitat conservation plan. And a lot of the big timber companies, they actually wrote up a habitat conservation plan saying they would not disturb these slope habitats of the species. I mean, they need moist, shaded, intact trees, mostly hardwoods, but these slope habitats, they really need to stay moist and undisturbed. And so these HCPs, you can get out of them anytime you want, but it's a level of protection that allowed a funding source that had not been used in Alabama. It's called HCP land acquisition. That was, since it was under an HCP, you could actually request federal money to buy land in that area. So I'm going to just go through a couple of these properties in terms of the colors and what they mean. The very top northern property in yellow shade, that is the first property the Nature Conservancy bought. That actually consists of 3 property owners, two private properties, and 1 large block from Weyerhaeuser. We bought those after we had met in 2006 with the state. We said, we want to work in this area. They said, okay, let's do it. So we were allowed to apply for what's called a Section 6 recovery grant. We got $650,000, and that allowed us to buy the first small tract or a couple tracts up there. And after that, the state of Alabama applied for HCP land acquisition money. We actually had the governor at the time, Bob Riley, write a letter of support. And so that brought another $4.2 million. And so the 2 yellow properties there, consisting of about 4,500 acres, were acquired by the Nature Conservancy, transferred to Forever Wild using mostly federal dollars. Now, one of the things about these grants, they have to be matched. So it's a 75-25 match. So 25% of the property's value has to be paid for by Forever Wild. Plus, if you know, every acre and every dollar of property that Forever Wild buys, they have to do a 15% endowment for management. So this is a tremendous multiple millions of dollars of investment by Forever Wild Land Trust and the federal government. The properties in blue and green, one of those has closed, and the rest are about to close in this summer. The Brown Shutt Trust, a little over 2,200 acres, and then the blue property, about 4,000 acres. That's all in line. It's been approved by Forever Wild. It's been approved by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And I just got off a Zoom meeting with Fish and Wildlife, and they're going to do a huge celebration down there. And they've pledged to try to support additional funding for the last piece down there, what's called Flat Creek Phase 4, the kind of orange colored, about 2,500 acres. And then lastly, the last property in red is about 5,800 acres. And we convinced the Alabama Forestry Commission to make that a new state forest if we can get a grant through USDA, National Forest Service, called Forest Legacy. We've done about, I don't know, maybe 6 Forest Legacies in the past. We think we've got a good chance of getting this funded. We're going to work on that with our government relations staff. And so you're looking at, 18,000 acres of property that would be protected for the Red Hill Salamander, with most of the money coming from the federal government and Forever Wild. And I'll mention during the phases of doing this, we've had a couple of field trips, and I think you'll notice some faces there. Cameron, you might even want to name some, but in the center in the vest is Dr. E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson, who's well-known author. He's well known for his research in ants and entomology, Harvard professor, and a big supporter of the Nature Conservancy and some of the work we've done. And I think Cameron will probably say that that was one of the best field trips that's been done in a while. So I'll leave it at that, and we can open the floor for questions.
Yeah, we'd ask that if you have a question, you please type it into the chat box below the bottom of your screen. Hey, Steve, can you talk a little bit more about the Red Hill Salamander?
Yeah, so yeah, again, the salamander is only known to occur in Alabama, nowhere else on Earth. Its habitat is restricted to kind of a ridge of soils, these soft clay soils that they burrow into. They can be up to 10 inches long. Something kind of interesting, in 2000, a 3rd grade class in Fairhope lobbied the state of Alabama to make the Red Hill Salamander the state amphibian, which they did. And so it's known by a few people, but not well known. A lot of studying's been done on the Red Hill Salamander, but the good thing is U.S. Fish and Wildlife really wants to see this animal delisted. So that would mean we would have to buy habitat, and not only what they call Deem 2, which is this area in Monroe County. A deem is kind of a subspecies. There's 5 deems of the Red Hill Salamander. So we're trying to figure out how much area we would have to protect to where it would fully be protected forever, and then you could delist that animal and not have it on the endangered species list.
Good, thank you. Other questions for Steve?
And I don't care if you open up the microphones if people want to ask instead of talk.
We're good. We're getting some questions in now. So how does the local community feel about our work in the Red Hills? Will it be open to the public?
Absolutely. It's all open. It will be open. It is open to the public now for hunting, hiking, botany research, wildlife viewing. It will all be open to the public. The property is going to be a WMA, so it will be managed by the Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division of Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. So there will be restrictions. There will be some gates up, so when it's not in hunting season, you won't be able to drive all over the whole property, but you certainly can hike in. And for the folks that have been down there, it is one of the most beautiful areas I've been to in the state. I mean, it's the coastal plain, and it looks like you're up in the Appalachian Mountains. It's absolutely gorgeous. Steep ravines, creeks, big leaf magnolias. There's more oak species in this Red Hills than in all of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Next question, Steve. Can you tell us the difference between a threatened species and endangered species?
It's just a higher level of protection. They're both within the Endangered Species Act. Sometimes it just refers to how much it's threatened. For the salamander, basically it was destruction of habitat, loss of habitat, because a lot of people that own the property really didn't even know it existed there, and they would cut every stick of timber that they could, because it was a timberlands and it was their investment. They just didn't even know. So by putting it on the either threatened or endangered list, it really highlights the fact that it's illegal to harm that animal.
Good. Next question. Have you been able to see the Cahaba lilies this year? And another question related to your slide, how was it meeting E.O. Wilson?
Well, I've met E.O. Wilson in several different locations, and I did not get to go on that particular field trip, so I did not meet him there, but I've met him in other places. Um, he actually has a biophilia center named after him in Florida that we had a 3-day meeting, and he was one of the speakers and intermingled with everybody. And he's just the most soft-spoken, brilliant, kindest man that you would ever want to meet, and really adds a lot of his, I guess, notoriety to the projects we work on.
Good. And she asked, did you see the Cahaba lilies this year?
Unfortunately, I've only seen photographs. I have not been down there. I guess I've been so uh, committed to staying indoors because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've got a 93-year-old mother-in-law that lives in our condo down from us that we don't want to bring back anything. So sadly, I have not. I've not, but I heard that they were pretty good. I'm not sure. I think several other people on the call may have seen them.
So, related to your last statement about not bringing something home to your mother-in-law, what type of challenges have you encountered during the pandemic as you work on the current acquisitions and transfers?
Well, that's a great question because I'll tell you, we're working on projects in the National Forest, the Okmulgee uh, uh, Ranger District of the Talladega. This is Chilton County. We bought 9 properties for inclusion into the U.S. Forest Service. Uh, Working with the U.S. Forest Service staff, they've had to work from home. A lot of these meetings have just been, Zoom meetings and phone calls. But actually, we're working on several closings now, and it's just been a little difficult because you can't meet in person, and but it's not held up our work at all.
Good. And here's a question from Cameron. Steve, is the land acquisition money threatened, and have federal staff numbers been reduced at all?
I haven't seen that yet. The people I work with have not seen staff reductions because federal appropriations have been pretty good for fish and wildlife. Um, Forest Service, same thing. Park Service, I still communicate with them. One of the big issues that Mitch has been working on, the whole Nature Conservancy globally, is reauthorizing the Land and Water Conservation Fund. LWCF funding was established in 1965 at a level of $900 million a year. That money comes from U.S. royalties from oil and gas production, mostly offshore. And so every year that has to be appropriated. It's not just doesn't just magically happen to be in the budget, but it looks like, so LWCF was 50-year and it was just reauthorized for permanent. So it's permanent now, and they're trying to, and I'm pretty sure even tomorrow there'll be a bill in the Senate that will be a fully funded, so fully funded at $900 million a year, LWCF. And that's for buying all federal lands that we've worked with, and all of the LWCF went to the Cahaba, our acquisitions at Little River Canyon, Bon Secour National Wildlife Refuge. So LWCF is very important.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much. It's been great having you on our Nature Calls program. It was really interesting and informative. I have a feeling you could talk about this a whole lot more. And,
I could.
I think most everybody here has your email address if you'd like to ask Steve a follow-up question. We're also going to put up an address on the screen for philanthropy, and we'd be happy to forward any questions you have on to Steve. So next week, we're going to have a really interesting program from the coast where one of our interns is going to talk about coastal debris, and it's part of our Lightning Point program. And you'll really want to hear that and tune in. If you're on the program today, you will automatically receive an invitation to next week's program. Feel free to share it with friends. You can just forward the email that you receive, or you can send us their name and email address, and we'll send them an invitation. So as you see, conservation never stops. The work goes on even during a pandemic. When many of us are working from home, our scientists and conservationists are out in the field doing their important work. So we need your financial support now more than ever. If you can, please make a gift today at support.nature.org/Alabama. And I want to tell you just really briefly, the Daniel Foundation of Alabama has awarded TNC a $75,000 challenge grant. That means for every dollar we raise, the Daniel Foundation will match it with another dollar up to $75,000. That effectively doubles your gift. And we're working really hard right now to match that entire $75,000. So if you can help us, we would really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.